Well, today I'm here with my good friend, Mr. Jeff Paine, who is a co-owner of a company in Austin, Texas called Break It Down or Break It Down Austin. And we're going to talk a bit about the history of Jeff's company and the kind of things that they're getting into. And I think we're going to have a fun, wide-ranging conversation here. In short, they collect food waste from clients all around Austin and they transform it into useful, valuable products like compost and many other things as well. So I think with that short intro, Jeff, let's just get into the conversation. Why don't you give us like a little sort of thumbnail sketch of your company, break it down, how and when it started, a little bit of the backstory behind that, and kind of bring us forward to today and the operation that you run today. And we'll kind of dive in a little bit because it's grown quite a bit and it's diversified quite a bit. And we'll kind of drill down into some different areas that you're working on today. But why don't we go back to the start of it and just give us a picture of how everything started?
Yeah, well, uh, good to be chatting with you as always, man. Um, we started in 2009, my wife and I, out of our front yard. We had an idea. We saw that there wasn't any composting services available in Austin for businesses. Um, and so we just sort of kicked it off as a trial initially, working with two different locations. I was a professional graduate student leading up to that point, had jumped around about four different programs at a few different schools, and was sort of always looking for the right program that I could sink my teeth into. And it took me a while to realize that the right program was not in academia. It was, running a business.
Okay.
But so we started in 2009 about our front yard. It was just pure sweat equity. We had a little half-ton Nissan pickup truck, and we'd make a little pile in our friend's backyard. And then we added a third account. We added a fourth. A couple of them wanted recycling, and so we started picking up recycling and taking that to a local recycling facility as well.
So,
And
okay, those first one or two or three or four clients that you had,
yeah,
and you're doing this out of your house, you're composting in your friend's backyard, and who are the clients?
well, the instigator was a yoga studio called Yoga Yoga. They had switched to a compostable Tai Chi, or sorry, compostable cup to serve their chai tea in. And then there was no service to get them composted though, so they're just throwing all these compostable cups away.
Mhm.
And you'll still hear this. It's a common statement even today. Hey, at least it'll break down in the landfill, which really misses the whole point that landfill science as a goal is to entomb everything. We don't want anything to break down in the landfill. And when it does, it's not good. Hence, the whole concept of composting is built around the idea that we want to keep food waste out of the landfill. And
Mhm.
yet there's this odd disconnect that, oh, well, somehow a compostable product is better. No, all these compostable products that go into the landfill currently, it would have been better a use of resources and less impact if we had just thrown plastic in the landfill.
Uh-huh.
But I'm getting a little ahead of myself with that. But it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, so you do have to start somewhere with some of these things.
Right.
But so we had these compostable cups, and we had a bunch of coffee grounds.
Okay.
And then
So,
that third account had vegetables, so that was useful to get a little more water in there.
okay.
But it was not like anything amazing. It was a fairly quiet pile. It didn't accomplish that much as far as creating lots of beautiful, usable compost.
Okay.
It would rather quickly. What I realized was this is more about keeping material out of the landfill than it is producing some kind of amazing product right out the gate. Um, and also early on, I had a lot of interest in alternatives to composting. Uh, One of the ideas that intrigued me initially, that's still going through R&D work, is the idea of black soldier fly composting.
Uh-huh.
Um, but we didn't have any food waste at that time, and we didn't have any money, so we thought, well, we'll start hauling it, and then we'll have a whole bunch of both, and then we can experiment with end stream processing. And I thought maybe that would take a couple years. Uh, you know, incredibly naive about cash flow and business development and growth and all of that. So it took about 14 years till really present day to get to a point where we could actually start to experiment with alternative
Right.
processing of food
Okay. Okay.
waste.
I don't want to like jump around too much. So, okay, so you're starting out. The initial thing was this these compostable cups from a yoga studio, and then you had some coffee grounds, you had some vegetable material. And these are from people's homes, just you're going around for people's homes in the neighborhood, or you're going to businesses?
This is almost all businesses.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did experiment with some residential at one point. Here in Austin, the city provides that service to single family homes now. So, and we always knew that would happen. We knew there was never really any sort of long-term market available for that. Every city is a little different. In some cities, even the business services are bid out to just the largest bidder, the best bid. And so it, in some ways stifles small business competition by really just rewarding, one of the three or four big haulers that exist nationally to compete against each other. That's what you might see in San Francisco or Seattle or Oregon. A lot of the West Coast, all those entire cities are just have one big hauler. There's no private market.
So the
Uh,
hauler, so in that case, the hauler is doing everything. They're doing residential as well as commercial. And what you're,
yeah.
so if I understand right, what you're saying is at the time that you all started, there either was a residential pickup program or you knew it was coming. And so you decided then to focus on businesses or sort of larger clients because there would be a residential pickup, but like businesses didn't have an option for compostable material.
Right. In fact, by charter, the city of Austin isn't even allowed to provide a trash recycling or compost services for businesses. So it's
What are they supposed to do? Does each
it's
business
it's
has to hire its own? Each business has to hire.
yeah, exactly. And so, there's different arguments to this. The argument for having one hauler do everything would be that there would be efficiency of pickup. As far as you just boom, 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 right down the street, getting every single one. The argument for a private market is that despite the maybe a reduced technical efficiency on going down one street, the competition between entities maintains efficiency.
Uh-huh.
So, and I think it can really go both ways. And there's probably examples where both work, and maybe where sometimes where both don't work. Um, that's probably better off on some other conversation sometime.
Right.
But I will say that because Austin did have a private market for composting, it allowed a company like ours to exist in the
Right.
first place, and it allowed us the opportunity to explore and to get to the point today where I think we're on track to do some really interesting, novel things with food waste. So I'm certainly grateful that there was an opportunity to even do that.
Cool.
Um,
So okay, well let's step forward a little bit. Okay, so you start out, you've got a handful of clients or customers where you're picking up stuff, you're composting in somebody's backyard, right? And then say 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you haven't given up and given up shop, folded up shop, or
should have.
yeah, uh, maybe you should have, but you didn't. I don't know why this reactions are popping up. Maybe I bumped something. Anyway, but okay, so you've added clients. Now you've got a few more customers, and so like what was your first increment of scale of growth? Because right, we're going to get eventually to where you are today. Where you are today, you have a lot of clients today, right? Well,
Yeah.
at some point you had 20 or 25 or 30 clients. So talk about that stage.
Well, yeah, we started with the Nissan pickup truck operating out of the front yard when we kind of had taken over the entire front yard with barrels, either empty or full of food waste or whatever. At that point, we had added on a single axle trailer to the half-ton pickup truck so we could grab more at a time. I then added on a double axle trailer to that Nissan, without realizing that doing so with a half ton and the amount of weight we could put on a double axle, I burned out the clutch, about 3 months later. So then we upgraded to a 3500, full 1-ton Dodge Ram dually,
Mhm.
pulling a double axle trailer, uh, drove the shit out of that thing. And, somewhere in there, I was able to finally start hiring some employees. I maxed out at about 120 hours a week on my own before I could afford to hire someone. So that was one of like the major hurdles, was just figuring out cash flow, because we're adding new accounts. We're growing every month. How can you walk away from a growing company? And yet we had no money because of cash flow issues. We didn't set up the billing properly. Um, and so it's just taking all this work before we get paid or have enough money to make that growth to be able to do more work.
Mhm.
Um, Eventually we had a fleet of E350s. I just love the Ford E350. The fact that Ford canceled that series is one of the saddest moments in car history for me, because those vans were just tanks. Um, and so we had a fleet of those that we would maintain, pulling double axle trailers, really like challenging work. You need to find someone who's both good at driving a double axle trailer around the city, navigating tight parking lots, but
Right.
also willing to do the manual labor of, turning a 300-pound barrel on its edge and rolling it up a gate
Right.
onto the bed of the trailer. So ultimately, we switched over to 24, 26-foot box trucks, just like general moving van trucks that everyone's familiar with.
Uh-huh.
So at this point in the game, we have a fleet of 4 of those box trucks plus a smaller Isuzu, like a 16-foot cab over, if that makes any sense to you, that term. So that's what we use for pickups now. They have lift gates, much easier to maneuver, um, much less labor to load the material on and off with that lift gate. And we're working with about 800 businesses,
Wow.
uh, running the entire I-35 corridor now from San Antonio up to Waco. So not just the greater Austin area at this point, but we're going, about an hour and a half north and south of there as well.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we can jump in a little bit. I do want to kind of like focus on this middle period because there's quite a long middle period. You're saying you got started in what did you say? 2008, 2009 was the origin?
2009 was the original. Summer of '09 was when we started the pilot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's how many, that's 16 years or something. My
I
math is
would say we had our best year ever, and we finally had a sense that we had made it over some sort of pain threshold and hump in 2019.
2019.
That was the first year where not only had we grown, but we hadn't run out of money doing it. Um, Not that 2018 was like a terrible year or anything either, but 2019 was definitely one of those first years where it was like, it's really starting to happen here.
Okay.
And of course, we all know what happened in 2020. Break it down, we lost half of our customers overnight, temporarily or permanently.
Hmm.
Um, and so, what was on track to be our greatest and best year ever by far, 2020 ended up being, quite a mess. But we made it through. And at this point, we're build back better, right? So we're actually stronger financially. We got more customers. We got a better team, better management. Just kind of across the board, everything has really improved.
Okay, so all right, so cool. So you have what you're saying is you got there about a 10-year period from the origin in 2009 until 2019 when something kind of turned over and it looked like it was going to succeed. In the middle was this kind of like valley of death that you're crossing, like trying to get in enough money to be able to pay people to buy equipment or maintain equipment. So and all the time during that time period, you're growing in number of clients,
Yeah.
and so the effort is you're growing in terms of number of clients, but then being able to keep up with the growth becomes difficult, and meeting payroll, or like what are some like what so one talk.
Yeah, I mean, cash flow, meeting payroll, just it's hard to anticipate all the systems that you need to keep a business successful. So, like, just trying to have enough drivers in trucks to make the pickups that day, having to jump into a truck because someone didn't show up for work, or they quit with no notice, or they were sick, or X, Y, and Z.
Uh-huh.
So all sorts of staffing challenges. When you're bootstrapping, you don't have any resources to put towards having a nice facility or having a nice vehicle. And when someone damages the vehicle, you tend to not fix it unless it's necessary.
Mhm.
So I would buy the cheapest E350s I could find. The cheapest one I ever bought was just for $1,000 up in Dallas. I didn't even make it home with it. I had to get towed the last stretch. Uh, Fixed it up myself. It looked like shit, had all these crappy decals on it, et cetera, et cetera. And, it was treated like shit. The first day it got taken out, a guy drove too tight against a dumpster and blew every window on the entire passenger side of the vehicle.
Wow.
Just scraped, punctured, and crushed the whole thing the whole way down. Uh, you could say it was self-fulfilling in that I gave him the shittiest vehicle I could find because I didn't trust him, and he in turn, confirmed all my expectations. But so there's all these systems you need, and you've got this, you're hauling food waste. So you got maggots and you got flies, and you don't appeal to everyone with what you're trying to do. And there's
Right.
odors. So it's just challenging to implement all the systems. So those first 10 years were, um, it wasn't that there was a risk that we were going to go out of business per se, because we were growing and we were figuring things out and improving every month, every year. But it was certainly nasty and hard, and I would never willingly go through anything like that again.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about so you're hauling food waste, like you're just alluding to. There's smells, there's flies, it's not the most appealing thing. It's kind of a dirty job. And so you've got drivers, there's a struggle to find good people and all that kind of stuff. You got to keep this equipment running. You're picking up this material that's not particularly appealing. And where's that material going? What are you doing with it? How are you processing it? How are you handling it? What's the fate of that material?
yeah, it went through a lot of stages too. So we started in our friend's backyard making a pile. Then as we grew, we started working with community gardens around Austin, and basically making compost piles with them at their community gardens that they could use. But then we just kind of outgrew all the community gardens. So there weren't enough community gardens that wanted compost or to actively compost on site to make that possible. There were also pressures to add in, and accept meat wastes, dairy products, certain stuff that a community garden would definitely not want, at a smaller scale. So at that point, we started hauling to a large permanent compost facility,
Uh,
and paying them a tipping fee. And we did that well, we're still doing that right now. We've done that for years. We have done some of our own composting, which we could talk about at some point if we want. We're planning to do some more of our own composting. All of my experiences, definitely also confirm though uh, that I don't really like composting that much.
yeah.
You
So
know,
I want to get into this, but so just to ask a question. So, okay, so you start out, you're doing composting in your friend's yard, and you're bringing the compost to community gardens and things like that, and then you grow beyond the scale where that works, and so you
yeah.
go to tip at an existing composting facility. So if there's already a composting facility, so you're hauling the food waste from the producers to the
Yeah.
composting facility. Where are they normally getting? So they're composting other stuff, or like how come they're not already doing what you're doing?
Well, yeah, they were. Yeah, so shortly after we started our hauling service, that same facility started doing its own hauling service. So, the waste industry is an interesting industry in that you have competitors that are also your vendors, sometimes simultaneously your customers. Break it down to subcontracting for a number of the other haulers in town. Um, and sometimes it depends on the service line. Technically, we compete with one hauler in recycling while we're simultaneously a subcontractor for them with composting, maybe a vendor for them if they're doing a different type of material that requires a compactor load. And then maybe they're our vendor if we're selling them recyclables. That literally, I can think of two or three different companies that fit all of those descriptions simultaneously.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting market, but I think most companies realize that there's benefits to working together, and there's also benefits to competing. And there's only really one company that's in town that's like super challenging to work with. They're kind of an island unto themselves, and very aggressive in their competition. They prefer to lead with lawyers and sue whenever possible and that kind of stuff rather than getting along with people.
Okay, so
Or at least that's how it seems.
part of your process here during this like 10 years of the sort of, trial by fire development, you're also interacting with all of these other entities. Like you're saying, like you could, with a particular company, you could be a competitor, you could be a subcontractor, you could be a vendor, you could have these different relationships with all these different groups. And those are also dynamic through time and changing. Now, is that a hugely complex thing to wrap your mind around and manage? Or is this just kind of like an organic thing that happens and it's actually not like, to me, it sounds pretty complicated and challenging, but maybe it's
Yeah.
not. Maybe it's kind of a natural way to do things.
Well, that's a really good question. If you look at some of the other small haulers that started when around the time that we started, um, they're all still, I would call it, like a small hauler that, maybe they've got 50 accounts or something like that. Um, so I guess I would say that there is certainly an art to navigating those sorts of negotiations and building partnerships. I think it's something that I enjoy and fall into naturally, and maybe I've done a better job than others at doing so. It also seems fairly straightforward. It's kind of about looking for opportunities, looking for ways to grow where, if you're going to grow, there needs to be someone you're benefiting for that growth. And so that beneficiary doesn't just have to be a restaurant producing food waste. It could be waste management, who is trying to compete with another large hauler, and they need some tools that they're not nimble enough to be able to do because they're so big. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities in this realm to run with it, and I do really enjoy that facet
Okay.
of development.
Cool. So we talked through the origin a little bit, and we talked through about this kind of growth phase that you've been through up to 2019, that period that you wouldn't repeat if you had a choice to avoid going through that again. And then, of course, COVID throws everything for a loop, and now you're coming out of that. And let's say, for the purpose of conversation, you're kind of like in a sort of somewhat of a new era of operation of your company, as it stands right now. Okay.
Yeah.
For listeners, viewers, and stuff, give a picture. So you said you have about 800 clients right now. You're operating from not just Austin, but all the way down to San Antonio and up to Waco. So maybe give kind of a picture of, okay, who are these clients? Like, is this a extremely heterogeneous group of businesses and stuff, or is it big corporate employers? Are you
Yeah.
ways?
There is a real mix. It's just certainly heterogeneous as far as there's hotels and schools, offices. Nevertheless, the bulk of the customers are restaurants for sure. So,
Okay.
Austin at this time has an ordinance that requires anyone with a food permit to have some sort of organics diversion plan. We could go into that, but anyways, whether we do or not, the point is that created a number of incentives for businesses to compost, and that helped drive business to us. But I think one of the important details with presenting the snapshot of Break It Down today is that we operate a little bit differently than the industry standard as far as hauling stuff. So the industry standard would be to use a garbage truck, rear load typically, but sometimes front load garbage truck to empty containers on a route. And you get all this compost in your garbage truck, then you go to the compost facility, tip it out, and that's where you make compost. Or maybe you're going to an anaerobic digestion facility where they're going to do it differently to make biogas. But that's sort of the industry standard. And what they're doing is they're mixing all the different food wastes together in their hauling vehicle. And then when they get to the compost facility, they add some mulch or whatever and just keep it mixed like that. There are a number of challenges with contamination. There are even opportunities for complete greenwashing in this industry as far as saying you're composting it, but not.
And that would be, you mean just taking it to the landfill and just dumping it in the landfill and say that it's composted?
Yeah, exactly.
You
And
think
it's not even real.
that
You
happens?
couldn't even necessarily say it's illegal in the sense that one of the issues with especially front load dumpsters is they just tend to attract contamination. I mean, we all kind of know this intuitively. If you go into the back of a restaurant and you look in the recycle dumpster, for example, it's always got contamination in it. It's the same for food waste.
Uh-huh.
And when you have too much contamination, there really is nothing else you can do with this material except throw it away.
Okay.
Uh, so it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, let's just provide these dumpsters. We know it's going to be too contaminated. We're not going to fine our customers if it is, and in fact, we're not even going to notify them. We're just going to leave it in the fine print that if it's too contaminated, we'll dispose of it. According to EPA regulations.
Right.
You're not even really allowed to do anything else. So there's nothing illegal about it. But what you end up with is composting on paper instead of composting in reality.
Right. Okay.
Um, anyway, to shift gears, as an alternative to this sort of system or a type of system, we haul everything in individual containers. So there's two benefits to doing this. One, every time we make a pickup, we are swapping containers for the customer. So they're starting fresh with a clean, rinsed cart. And when we get back to our facility and empty that container out, we then give it a rinse before it goes back out to the next customer. I consider that the keystone element of our entire business model. And
So
and
you're
that,
saying
hmm?
so the distinction there is, one, you're swapping containers, they get cleaned with each round. So they get
Yeah,
a container, and because everything is done in these individual sorted containers, you have less problem with contamination that would cause you to have to just dump that at the landfill instead.
exactly. Now you're controlling for contamination because 99% of the contamination is in 1% of the containers. And so when you get it back, if it wasn't visible on top and it's hiding in there, and you go to tip it out, you can just catch that barrel and throw that one barrel away. If
Uh,
we were using a garbage truck, that one barrel would contaminate the other 100 barrels with all that broken glass and just destroy the potential value of all of it.
Okay, so when you say, this is good for the listeners too, when you say contamination, you're talking about non-compostable things, broken glass, what, metal, or just trash?
Yeah, it could be anything. I mean, plastic films, yeah, any kind of metal, aluminum foil, silverware, ramekins, Brillo pads, straws. Glass is obviously the worst because when it breaks, you start getting lots and lots and lots of little fragments, and we really don't want to dump that in someone's garden or on their, in their mulch bed or wherever.
Right.
So glass is the worst. Metal's probably the second worst, just because of potential safety concerns there, and also damage equipment.
Uh-huh.
Um, but plastic is certainly the most common as far as just having all sorts of different types of plastics in there. And some of that is confusion around what is a compostable plastic and what isn't.
Right.
Um, which I think as a society we're still trying to learn and figure out. And there's new products on the market every day, so it's always evolving.
Right.
Um,
Okay, so go back to, okay, so you've got your individual containers, you have some protection against contamination, or it's easy to identify when you have it. So you've got kind of like addressed that problem. You bring your containers back to your facility, they get washed out before they go back to the customer. Now you've got this food waste. So what happens at your facility with these streams of food waste that are coming in?
Yeah. Well, this is the exciting part where we're at today, because the other benefit of swapping containers is now we've got all these individual containers of different types of food waste. And one of the things that that just has really stuck with me over the years in just working in the trenches and slogging away, hauling all sorts of stuff day after day, is that, food waste is not just one unifying homogeneous material. There are so many different types of food wastes out there, and different items have different potential uses. So, you've got coffee grounds. There's all sorts of gardeners, or mushroom growers or other people that just use coffee grounds for all sorts of random stuff. I think I have some bowls here in my kitchen that like someone threw coffee grounds into the manufacturing process just to make them look pretty. Totally random. You could use coffee grounds in soap. Anyway, the point is, you got all these different types of food waste. There's vegetables here. There's broth wastes there. Coffee grounds. Compostable products over there. What are you going to do with them? How can we use these things since we've kept them separate?
Uh-huh.
What can we do to take advantage of that separation? As contrasted with, we just mixed everything together. We have this big heaping mess.
Yeah.
Really, all you can do is throw it in a pile on the ground and let it decompose. Um, so, uh, what we fell into was dehydration as a first step in handling this material as it comes into our facility. So, the point being, if you get all the water out of it, now you can stabilize it. Now that food waste material, it's still there. You've removed 80% of the weight, 90% of the weight sometimes, because it's so much water and food waste. But now that the rest of that material is still there and it's stabilized, it becomes, in my mind, a material science question. How can we manipulate this material into a form that's usable at a higher and better value than just compost? The whole industry has, done a good job of marketing compost as black gold. But frankly, it's really low quality and it's really low value most of the time. The economic and regulatory incentives for composting facilities, especially ones that handle food waste, tend to result in a turn and burn strategy where stuff is not curing for nearly long enough to be of good quality. There's obviously certain exceptions to that, but
Yeah. Let's dive into this a little bit. So one comment that you made a little bit ago was that, after all this, you started a composting company and then you got into it and at some point realized that you don't really actually like composting that much.
yeah,
What you're saying here is like it's sold as this black gold stuff, but then the incentives are lined up. So you're saying that the compost is not necessarily good quality, like it's not getting decomposed well enough to be a good compost. So tell me about what's the sort of status quo that you're criticizing, and why is the status quo the way it is? Are like environmental regulations, or is it like city codes, ordinances about odor, or what is it that shapes the industry?
yeah.
What's the quality of the product that's kind of the status quo thing that's out there, and what are the strikes against that? Because you just mentioned that you've gotten into dehydration, right? Well, immediately I'm thinking,
Mhm.
okay, dehydration is a great idea. You're driving off the water. It takes a lot of energy to drive water out of material, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's going to be an investment of energy. It's going to be an investment of equipment. The idea is you're going to upcycle something. You're going to create some kind of product that makes it worth doing that. And that's where I want to go with the conversation. But first, lay out really clear for us the status quo and why the status quo is inadequate and what's really going on with this. We've already learned that a lot of times the composting industry is false, is greenwashing, because they're just taking contaminated dumpsters and throwing them in the landfill, and most people don't even necessarily know that that's what's going on. Okay, so for the mixed compost that gets made at these large status quo facilities,
Yeah.
what's describe that as kind of the background status quo, so that
Well,
we have.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll try to do it as well as I can. First of all, one point that should be made is just that there will always be a need for composting, and there will always be a role for composting. So I'm definitely not trying to go so far as to argue that composting is going to die off or something. There's huge amounts of material that need a home, and there's not big enough dehydrators to handle that logistically. So
Uh-huh.
sometimes you can and will always need to make just a pile with this stuff and let it decompose. Their regulatory challenges are that the history of composting is marked by people also running illegal landfills. And so the way the EPA monitors this is you have to get a permit to operate your facility. And within that permit, you typically need to have a certain amount of your incoming material needs to be hauled off, effectively sold or otherwise given away, but typically sold every 6 months.
Mhm.
And so, because if you're not, then the EPA is going to say, well, it looks like you're running an illegal landfill, because that's the concern. They don't want someone moving into a lot, throwing out a cheap tipping fee, bringing in a ton of material, and then just walking and leaving a mess.
Mhm.
Because this has happened numerous times over and over. And I don't really have any examples of that, but certainly that's the commonly understood concern from the EPA.
Okay.
So you've got to be moving material back out, and so they have a system that basically, you're tracking your tonnage coming in. You need to track your tonnage going out, and move stuff quickly. And 6 months is not really enough time to make a good quality compost.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it also depends on how much space you have on site. You're typically going to have to locate these facilities pretty far out of town. So now you've got high energy costs to haul the material. You're going to need probably $5 million worth of equipment at least, as far as grinders, trommel screens to separate material out, any other equipment you might need, front loaders, etc., excavators to load the grinder. The list really just kind of goes on and on. So you got all this huge expensive equipment. Uh, and so what you need to do with these facilities for out of time is bring in a ton of material, and then you want to turn and burn as fast as possible because that'll give you the best, obviously, the revenue. The longer it sits there, the more it's going to break down, the less tonnage you'll have, and now you're going to have a greater risk of regulatory issues because you're not moving it fast enough.
Uh-huh.
Um, so those are some of the issues that I see with the current industry. Is just how expensive it is, the high costs to truck this material far out of town, and the relatively low quality or low value added material out the back end. Certainly, the business model works. I mean, you can see examples of facilities all over the country, and there's more of them every year. Uh, so that model works, but it's also going to run into problems if we decide as a society that keeping food waste out of a landfill is important. Let's take Austin as the example, and let's say we were keeping all food waste out of the landfill, and let's say we were only making compost with it. We would have so much compost regionally that the value would drop through the floor. There would be an overabundance, and there wouldn't be enough markets to really move any of it. And so now, are those facilities even still going to be able to be profitable, given there's just too much material available? So there's definitely, I think, some challenges coming up, and I think we'll start to see that first in California with all of their aggressive legislation. Um, but first in California, we'll see if there's even enough people to haul that food waste out of town.
If they make it so you can't use diesel trucks, then we're gonna have battery operated trucks. Anyway,
Yeah,
I don't want to get kind of
or
too lost in that, but I do think it's a really interesting point that you're making. If you capture all of the food waste from Austin, right?
Mhm,
And the issue that you have is if you take that and you compost it, you're going to have like more compost than you're going to be up to yours in compost. And
mhm.
and so okay, I think it's surprising. I'm a little bit surprised to hear that, and I'm like, are there because I mean, there's huge agriculture in Texas, around in the areas around Austin. You have, I mean, you would think that like farms would be like, okay, like if you have that much compost from food waste and the price is very low, you would think that they would see that, like, and say, well, I could stop buying this expensive synthetic fertilizer and then get compost for next to nothing, and there would be some kind
Yeah.
of synergy there. And like, what's preventing that from?
Well, that could be. I mean, it could be that the market, if the cost dropped low enough that more and more farms wanted to purchase compost because it was cheap enough, that could be. I think there would be issues of reliability, issues of making sure that the quality assurance on that compost is good enough. Lots of challenges for the farmer with adopting that strategy. Now they need a machine to somehow spread it on their fields potentially. Is that different from how fertilizer is spread? I'm not really an expert on that. I don't know.
Okay.
You also certainly are going to have seasonal challenges with all this because the food waste is being generated daily, every day, about the same amount, whereas there's seasonal demands for the material being produced out the back end. So that could be a rather nasty, like cyclical business cycle to try to run through, where you're holding on to tons of it temporarily, and now you have those regulations you're staring down the face at too, and
Mhm.
waiting to move as much as possible in the spring when everyone wants it.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to where break it down fits in terms of the standard model that's out there, like you're saying, is turn and burn, get a huge amount of material in, compost it rapidly as hot as you can, and then move it off site because of regulatory reasons and because of economic and business reasons. Okay, so you
Yeah.
guys are taking a different approach. Tell us about your different approach.
So the different approach is largely centered around dehydration right now. I do think that biochar will ultimately be another very useful component to add in. Basically, looking at it from the standpoint that some materials aren't going to dehydrate well. And if they don't dehydrate well, then maybe rather than a low temperature system like that, maybe we want to just nuke it with, 500 Celsius, something like that. So, anyway, with dehydration, we've been targeting different particular food streams coming into our facility and making recipes for specific targeted products out the back end. So the best example right now would be that we actually started a dog food company with some friends a year ago, where we are taking specific, high quality, consistent material from a couple different commissaries around town, essentially picking up broth wastes and juicing material, mixing it together in certain at certain ratios, and cooking it down into high quality dog food.
Okay.
So that's an example where, not only are we hauling it in separate containers to make that possible, we even have to time our pickups with the broth facility so that we're getting the material while it's still hot,
Mhm.
because it'll spoil sometimes literally within hours.
Right.
And sometimes we don't get it and we can't use it. Or sorry, we don't get it when it's hot, and so we can't use it. But it's typically coming back when we do use it at about 180 degrees Celsius,
Okay.
and then going straight into a machine.
So, okay, so some of this material you're able to pick up from specific places, like the facility that makes this broth for different restaurants and stuff like that. And then they have this waste material, which is like scraps of meat, some fat, some liquid fat, some solid fat, some bone, and some water. And it's kind of this slurry, right? And
Uh-huh.
so, and you get that. You're also able to get different types of vegetable waste, but the key is that you're getting it fresh so that you can work with it. This is not like rotten, gross stuff coming in because you're getting it before it has a chance to spoil.
Yeah.
And then it goes into your processes here. For example, this dehydration process where you're blending this kind of stuff. And so you figured out like some kind of a recipe or something like that, or like how did the idea to take these particular food waste streams and turn them into dog food, like how did that come about? And what, like what are the requirements, I guess, in terms, like why are you picking these things, and how does that work to make dog food from this human food waste?
Well, with the dog food one specifically, at the time I was just experimenting with a dehydrator, throwing all sorts of different materials in. Because, like I said before, we have all these different containerized materials coming in, and they're all separate. And I was just curious, what if we throw this one in? What if we throw that one in? How about this one over here? And so one of them was the broth waste. And when it came out of the dehydrator, I was standing with the owner of the company that makes these dehydrators, Hungry Giant. And I turned to the guy and I said, "Oh my God, I think we made dog food." And we were kind of laughing about it, but it looked like dog food.
Mm.
And so I brought it home to show my wife, and our little Boston Terrier came running over and just started eating it right out of the bucket, just going crazy over it. So that was how the idea was born. From there, as we started learning about, well, what's the quality of this material we just made? It's too high in calcium. So now we know we need to separate some of the bone out before it goes into the machine. How well does it form? What kind of nutrients is it missing? It made sense to add in a few different vegetables. And so the obvious sources for those vegetables was from juicing facilities that we already were working with.
Okay.
And so that's sort of how it evolved from there. And it was, it's been a significant year of R&D in terms of formulating those final end products and what they look like, and even just how to achieve the exact results we want consistently.
Okay.
Um, so that was, that's one really interesting example where our hauling system informs our processing system in a way that creates a better value added product. Um, Another example, we're separating all this bone out now because we're making dog food. Well, that bone can go and be dehydrated as well. And it turns out when you take broth bone and you throw it in a dehydrator, you get a clay. And so we thought, well, maybe we can add something in to get that same powder that everyone likes. So we add some coffee grounds in because we have a lot of that laying around. And there's other materials we experimented with as well. And it works. So now you get this nice powder, and it's 315-0 as far as the NPK, which is what you would expect for a bone meal. Um, and I'm actually very curious. I sent off a bunch of competitors' bone meals that are on the market. I wanted to see what the trace nutrient levels are like, because NPK is obviously the standard, right? That's what we care about the most. But there are all sorts of trace nutrients that are relevant and valuable as well. And my hunch is that there's not as many trace nutrients present in your typical bone meal because it's being manufactured and processed at these massive scales. So it's a slaughterhouse shipping bone to a rendering plant, which is now cooking down this bone with like 500-degree steam extraction or technology, and then they're hammer milling it and who knows what else. And I'm betting that just those really high temperatures are going to cook out most of those nutrients and vaporize them or aerosolize them or whatever. I don't really know those, so I'm curious to see that result as compared with a low temperature processing system.
Right. Okay, so you've got this blend where you're taking the bones separated from the broth making facility, you're blending that with some coffee grounds or something, and you're making a bone meal material, comparing that to competitors. What do people use bone meal for? Why are people interested in that product?
Well, bone meal's been around for a while. It's high in phosphorus. So as far as what plant nutrients are needed for plants to grow well, it can be a useful soil amendment
Okay.
for adding into gardens when it's needed. Now it's not that clean and easy because phosphorus isn't very water soluble and it tends to stay locked up where it is. So there's a lot of soil science details that I think are challenging to understand um, around using it. But as far as its reputation is generally around providing phosphorus for plants that builds healthy roots, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
So this is like for like home gardeners or landscapers or farmers would buy it as a fertilizer for their fields, or like who's mainly buying this?
I think it's typically going to be gardeners that are using this. I don't know the degree to which bone meal is used by farmers. I'm not sure what the alternative solution would be if your soil was low in phosphorus. So I'm still trying to learn about some of those more market details. We've been pretty focused and consumed on the more of the manufacturing and operation process thus far. So I would say some of this is still needs to be learned as far as identifying the different market opportunities for who wants this or who can benefit from this.
Okay,
Um,
so these kind of like these R&D projects, whether it's making dog food or making bone meal, we can talk about some of the other things that you're working on. Give it an idea about where these are at in terms of like, okay, this is like we're doing R&D, we're figuring it out, or like this is in stores, or this is available, or you can buy it through the web. Um, in
yeah,
terms of
the dog food is available on our website at theconsciouspet.life. And it's available in stores in Central Texas, Tomlinson's, and a grocery co-op called Wheatsville, and then a couple delivery services in the area. So that one is completely commercially available anywhere in the lower 48 states. We'll ship our products to you. We're not currently shipping the dog food. We have some toppers and we have some treats that we'll ship out of state.
okay,
But the dog food just it doesn't hold up very well to shipping at the moment. This goes back to like all the work in trying to formulate a nice finished product. It works pretty well. We had some friends of all things that had with a dog that had alopecia and all its hair grew back when they switched over to our food.
wow.
So there's some ancillary things where it's like, wow, this must have some pretty good nutrition if it did that for that dog. Um, but if you're ordering it in Rhode Island, there's a risk that it's just going to show up as a bag of powder if it just gets trampled too much in the shipping system. So
Okay.
um,
But that's
anyway, there's some insurance issues with that, but food is totally available. The bone meal we're not yet selling. We're really trying to make sure we perfect it and understand exactly the differences between what we're making, what's currently available, making sure that we have a nice, happy, consistent product before we bring it to market. And there's, yeah, like you alluded to, there's two or three other products we're also currently working on right now, and there's probably about five or six products on my wish list as far as other soil amendments go. And then there's also, to go in the direction of biochar, there's the whole bone char process that you and I are both working on with Aguas de Camino.
right, right. I'll give a quick rundown of that just so people know what we're alluding to, and then I have some other questions I want to get to, just more about break it down and stuff. Anyway, yeah. So full disclosure, Jeff and I are working on a project to utilize some of the bones that he gets in, specifically from the ramen facility. Like we're talking about, he's been making bone meal, but also we can use bone to make bone charcoal or bone char, which is can be used to remove excessive fluoride from drinking water. And I work with a small organization in central Mexico called Caminos de Agua, who serves communities in their region to provide safe drinking water and promote health in the community. And one of the problems that they have there is that the groundwater has naturally geogenically high concentrations of fluoride, so they need to bring that fluoride concentration down to make the water safe to drink. And they are looking for a source of bone char to use in the water treatment systems that they're setting up. And so Jeff and I have been exploring this idea of possibly making the bone char at his facility. That could be a commercial product that would eventually, at some point in time, make money for his business, but would also provide this sort of low-cost sorbent for projects in decentralized drinking water in developing countries and stuff like Mexico. So maybe we'll have some point have a special podcast and just go into that if people seem like they're interested in that kind of thing. But I wanted to kind of keep the focus for now, at least a bit, on break it down and how you're situated. We've talked a lot about how you're situated overall in composting and in food waste and stuff like that. You're at the point now where you've grown to have about 800 clients or so. I wanted to get like a bit of a snapshot just of the organization itself, of break it down. So, you grew from just you and your wife starting out, in your front yard and your friend's backyard, and now you're a company and you've got how many employees do you have? And like, tell me a little bit about the different jobs. Obviously, there's people driving trucks and hauling waste, but what are the main categories of jobs that you have at your company?
Yeah, so there's about somewhere around 20 employees. And you could break it loosely into three different thirds. A third of the employees are drivers, haulers, as we call them. They're the ones driving the box trucks. We operate 7 days a week, where we're picking up compost and recycling. And so the drivers are the ones going out and making those physical pickups. swapping in the empty for the full containers, bringing it back to the warehouse.
Okay.
Uh, and then the next third is the warehouse team that's receiving those trucks. So they, help unload the trucks. They get all the different materials coming off those trucks going in the direction they need to go. And then they're rinsing the containers and reloading that truck for the next route. We also do recycling. So we're bringing off cardboard and we're baling it and shipping that to a cardboard mill. There's single stream recycling that we receive that we just literally just turn around and send up to the MRF to sort rather than handle that on our own. And then there's all the food waste. We receive about 20 tons of food waste a day, give or take. It's a little bit lighter on the weekend. So a third of the team is receiving that material and handling the facility and maintaining the facility. And then kind of roughly speaking, the other third of the team is managerial and administrative as far as operations, accounting, bookkeeping, account management is a huge one for us. We do very little sales. It's really just responding to incoming inquiries, word of mouth, existing customers that are growing, etc. It's on our list to probably one of the next big hires will be in that sort of marketing and sales side. We've never really done any traditional marketing on our own because I just have always felt that it's more important to focus on operations.
Okay.
And I've watched, lots of other small companies show up in our space. They do a great job of marketing. Everyone in the city knows about them. People in the city still know about those old competitors more than us sometimes, but they've been long out of business because they put the cart before the horse, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I think that's a common challenge for small businesses to figure out is how to do effective sales and marketing when there's so much pressure to look so polished and talk the talk and et cetera. I think a lot of times, a lot of businesses don't invest enough in their operations to walk the walk.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's a good segue into another topic I wanted to delve into with you a bit. I want to give me an idea or tell me some anecdotes about some of the challenges that you face, like kind of external challenges, right? So, for example, if there's a competitor, that's out of business, but they did a great job marketing and they couldn't deliver, and does that turn people off towards composting? Does that cause a problem? Are there setbacks that occur because the city council is messing around with different regulations or codes, conflicts with other groups around town or with your neighbors? Like, what are some of the biggest thorns in your side, I guess, in terms of trying that are taking your energy away from the mission of the business to deal with, and maybe like, so what people can understand as like pitfalls or precautions to watch out for, like you're taking fire from places that you might not have thought of, but now you
Yeah.
realize actually here is a major vulnerability, and how do you deal with that, or how do you avoid those problems?
Well, I think historically our major vulnerability was just lack of adequate resources um, to maintain a fully hired staff to go out and make the pickups. That historically has been one of the hardest problems to handle is having a nice enough job to offer someone that they want to stick around and grow with the company.
Uh-huh.
Bootstrapping has all of this, kind of romanticized tone to it, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone if they could do it otherwise, because it takes so much work and it's so hard. And, you have to make certain choices when you're short on resources. What are you going to invest in? And, you're going to tend to end up in the scrappiest warehouse available. And that will impact what the energy is like at your company, and that will impact employees wanting to stick around and show up there every day. So, that's probably been the worst thorn over the years. If you fast forward to today, we seem to maybe have finally gotten a handle on it this year with just some improvements in our administrative and managerial systems to where we really have a great team working with us, and everyone really seems like they want to be there by and large.
Okay.
And if I could make one plug that's a little bit off topic or not, uh, for those considering it or otherwise, if someone's in a position to hire, we hire a lot of guys in the driving and warehouse that have felony records. And frankly, there's some of the hardest working, best employees we've ever had.
Yeah.
And the stigma around that and the barriers those guys, people tend to face, I think is fairly unjustified. There are some bad apples tucked in there, and we've had some of them. But it was well worth it to employ and make the decision to employ folks in that situation in general. You know, they've done their time, and the ones that are with us today are dead focused on improving their life, and it's been really rewarding to watch that happen with them.
And
Uh,
is that something that came about just of your own volition that you just particularly were like, I feel bad for people that have been through the criminal justice system and they have a mark on them for life and it's really going to harm their chances and I want to do something about that? Or like what led you
it
to
was,
getting an opportunity for people with a criminal past?
it was pretty organic, really. It was kind of like, well, this guy applied and he's got a felony, and do we want to hire him or not? And it was pretty much always, well, yeah, because we're having a hard time employing anyone. So heck yeah, we want to hire him. We don't care what he did 10 years ago or whatever. It's not our business.
Okay.
So that it kind of just fell out organically from that standpoint. What then propelled it forward even faster was just that uh, a lot of these guys know each other. They know another guy who needs a job, or there's that guy down the street who's right now he's only making $10 an hour at the car wash, and he's only getting 25 hours a week lately because it's been raining a lot. So next thing you know, you've got more people interested in a job than you even have jobs available.
Okay.
So it really just kind of jumped that way.
Well,
Um, if I were going to shift gears to the other thorn that we've had that wasn't, there were concerns when we first moved in about the neighborhood next door to us, and unfortunately, those concerns ended up being fairly justified because there's a small minority of neighbors that live in our region who are extremely aggressive and vocal in their hatred of us, if I'm going to be blunt about it. We started composting on site at one point, and there's a fair number of reasons that probably not worth going into at the moment around why we had to do that and why we did that. But ultimately, some odors were slipping across from our facility over into the neighborhood. And most of the people were pretty nice about it and just asked if we could figure out a way to stop it. And when we first were notified about it, we were just immediately over in the neighborhood trying to monitor it, trying to identify it. It turned out to be very temporary. So it'd just be a fleeting odor that would pass through really quick. So I never was actually able to even smell this odor myself because we'd be notified about it. I'd jump in my truck and run over, and I missed it.
wow.
Um, After a few months of trying to monitor and identify is this even us, uh, we ended up deciding to shut down our composting facility on site and return back to just shipping it out of town to another processing facility.
Okay.
But unfortunately, nevertheless, that small minority that hated us just continues to hate us anyways. And it's not helped by the fact that we both are right across from one of the two large wastewater facilities in the entire city. And this facility has acknowledged that it produces odor. It has a track record of producing odor that's confirmed by the EPA, et cetera. The small minority of neighbors is just adamant that they no longer produce any odor and that all odor generated is from us. But the reality is that we are occupying an industrial part of town where there's a wastewater facility, there's the state prison, there's a porta pot facility about a quarter mile up the street from us as well. There's us. Um, Almost every business on the strip is otherwise either an odorous facility or it's just super run down. There's been very little investment in this part of town at all.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Part of some of that comes down to a lot of the areas in the floodplain, so development is not even really allowed. But development company bought a bunch of cheap land in the middle of this, and they drop shipped this modern home development into it. And I guess I would call it the cheapest $1 million home you could buy.
Mhm.
Uh, and so some of these people are very aggressive about defending and increasing their home value by trying to push out anyone near them.
Okay.
Just to give you an example of the kind of people, these are people who buy land next to a train track, next to a 5 acre industrial lot, and then call us and complain when backup sounds are made by a truck on site at our facility.
Uh-huh.
These are required backup sounds,
Right.
required by insurance, required by regulations, and they'll actually, literally, someone called 2 weeks ago and complained, said they were going to call the city and the cops on us because of the backup sound,
Wow.
which is fine. I know all these people pretty well because they've been called numerous times before. And they'll come over and we talk and then they go, and there's nothing that can be done because we're not breaking any rules.
Right.
But lately, they've been fairly quiet. The last time I heard from them, they had a little social media flurry where they went and gave us a bunch of negative reviews and then said more to come, ominously. They called our property manager and tried to talk him into canceling our contract. That's probably illegal, even, and we certainly noted that. But there's just no level, there's no limit to what they'll do or accuse us of. They've complained about coyotes, hogs, rodents, flies, vultures. Uh, who knows what they'll come up with next, really, is where it's at with them. They're the single greatest threat to our company, really, if you get down to it. We don't really have many threats. We're doing great and uh, growing fascinatingly, but they're just a huge distraction. And again, it's really just three houses,
Okay.
just
Quite
three
small.
houses who decide. Most of the people over there are pretty nice. I've
Uh-huh.
talked to some of them. Some of them were frustrated with us. Maybe they still are, but they're quiet about it. I don't know. They don't harass us, and we don't harass them. But occasionally there's odor complaints, and they'll run TCQ out. It definitely fits the sort of NIMBYism that people like to talk about. I hate that word NIMBYism because I think that it's just got too much baggage with it at this point. Some types of NIMBYism makes sense. It's fair, it's reasonable, and some types of NIMBYism is perhaps uh, you know, like we all like identify with it going too far.
Mhm.
So I think it really is a complex issue, but it's created a ton of stress on and off. It just doesn't feel that good to have people calling you up, leaving hate mail, calling you at 11 p.m. at night, cursing out your voicemail when they're drunk. There's all sorts of characters over there, but
So, okay, well, so it sounds like, there's a few people that have sort of self-designated themselves to be sort of busybodies about this kind of thing, but just maybe to put it in a more neutral perspective, yeah, like you're saying, your facility is kind of on the industrial side of town. And I mean, from my visit not long ago, I could tell I'm driving into town. You guys are kind of on the outskirts of town, but being in the area, going around Austin, I mean, the area is experiencing explosive growth. I mean, it's growing like crazy.
yeah,
How many cranes did I see in the sky, as
yeah.
going around? And so inevitably, somebody's going to see an opportunity. Like, here's this cheap land in this industrial part of town, and property values are going through the roof. So why not just, like you're saying, like just pop up a neighborhood
Mhm.
of nice modern looking homes or whatever, and sell them off like hotcakes. but then you have this conflict where like it's the people they moved into that part of town, maybe they didn't really know like the background of the situation or whatever, and so
Oh yeah, so the development company makes, I would probably assume, every effort not to educate them on what they're buying into. So we've gotten emails from new homeowners who bought across the tracks next to us, and the email started with, "I had no idea there was a composting facility across the train track from me.
Mhm.
I just built my dream home. Don't you think you would be better located somewhere else?" I paraphrase, but that's pretty much verbatim an email we got from a resident at one point.
Wow.
Um, uh, the property development company themselves was super upset with us this winter. All the leaves had fallen off the trees. And when the leaves fall off the trees, all the new homes they had just made right next to us, because a whole bunch of these homes were built just in the last year. They're now staring out their back window at us, and they were having trouble selling these homes. Well, the interest rates have gone up, and you built this $1 million home that's staring at a 5 acre industrial lot. Is that my fault that you can't sell that home right now? But they won't even talk to us anymore. They're only communicating through a lawyer at this point, and they're threatening to sue. It's ludicrous. They're it's hard to talk rationally about it sometimes because I'd rather just do my thing and stay focused on the goals. So
Right.
it's really kind of distracting from time to time to have to come out of that and call up friends and ask favors and check in with lawyers to say, hey, are they full of shit right now? And pretty much the general response is, yeah, they're just smoke and mirrors. There's nothing they can do, and they know it. And that's why they haven't done anything. But it still is a distraction and a pain in the
Right.
butt.
Imagine. I imagine. Well, that's a bummer. It's a kind of interesting case there, but yeah, definitely a bummer. I mean, it's good to hear. I guess in a way, like if that's your biggest vulnerability or threat, then it's kind of good because it sounds like they're super obnoxious, but they don't really have a strong any kind of a strong case. So probably it's going to be annoying, but maybe nothing is going to come of it. It's not really going to
Yeah.
not
It's
going to
really the only real damage they've done is our Google review rating is down. We provide a free public drop off for cardboard for the community, and so most of our reviews are 5 star from people who are happy to have somewhere to drop off cardboard because there's only 2 locations in the entire city that make it available.
Mhm.
Um, and then we just have a small group of 1 stars from people across the railroad tracks who don't buy land next to a 5 acre industrial lot across from the waste management facility and next to a train track and then complain about noise and odor. Just know
Yeah.
what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
If you want that lifestyle, then buy the $800,000 home on the other side of town. Don't buy the $1 million home right here or whatever.
Mhm.
Get a little bit less and be happy with it.
Right, 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 right. Okay. Well, I think we can start wrapping. I got a couple more topics that I wanted to pose to you to finish up with. So, this might I don't know, it might get a little spicy. I'm not sure. But one of the things that you mentioned to me in one of our conversations was we're talking about employees and the culture, break it down, and business in general. And I think super, like you said, a big challenge has been, retaining good people in the company, but you're starting to get on top of that. And it's cool that you've like found, been able to hire a lot of felons that turned out to be some of your best employees. That's super awesome. But there's a offhand comment you made to me at one point about how if you're interviewing two people for a job, break it down, and they're very, very similarly qualified, except one person has a college degree and one person doesn't have a college degree, that you're inclined to go with the person that doesn't have the college degree. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on your rationale behind that a little bit, and in the context, because I mean, you and I
Yeah.
we know each other originally from grad school, so it's like your way around academia. Like you at the start of our talk, you mentioned that you had bounced around a lot among a lot of different grad programs, and you were trying to find a kind of project or something big to sink your teeth into. You didn't manage to find it in the context of university or academia, and you have found it in the context of running this business. So reflect a bit on the pros and cons of the academic path through life, and what have you learned having sort of walked both of these paths to a certain extent? What kind of perspectives do you have to share about that?
Oh man. Well, yeah, I'm certainly a textbook case of hypocrisy probably with some of this. Bachelor's in physics, and then we met at Berkeley, and I got and stopped with a master's there in Earth and planetary science, and I'd done some geophysics at Michigan before that, and did some biochemical engineering at Berkeley after, and then ended up at UT here, where I got a master's in chemical engineering before I dropped out of that program for Break It Down. So that just illustrates the trajectory a little more detailed. But I think the problem that I felt coming out, looking back on my experience with academia, is that it never helped me identify what I wanted to do with my life. And I think that that's a huge failing of the school system in general, is that, yeah, you do different classes and you gravitate towards things you enjoy more than others. But when I look at all my friends who are trying to figure out what to do with their time, and I look at myself, like no one really knew what to do. A lot of kids coming out of college, they went to law school, and frankly, a lot of them just looked like they didn't know what else to do, and they had a humanities degree, so let's get a legal degree next, and then we'll figure it out from there. A lot of kids went to graduate school and ended up becoming PhD professors, in part because once you go to graduate school, I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but you're kind of locked into a trajectory there. You're encouraged to call out a specific niche space within the sciences where you are the expert in it. And now that you've done that, you can market yourself and get a position as a professor somewhere, typically, and then you just can continue down that career path. And I saw that as a little bit of a trap, in that it's very easy to just go that route the way most of our peers did at the time, um, without ever maybe at some point in your life taking the time to identify what do you actually enjoy doing.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be just this one track mind plan that we lay out where now I'm going to become this specific professional. Um, so that was my biggest disappointment with grad school, and looking back over it. That's probably a little different from my hiring decisions. We've had just a number of different experiences with employees with college degrees that were not favorable or enjoyable, where some of them just seemed like they thought that because they had this college degree, they knew better than us, or that they were, should be doing higher level work, of which they really didn't seem that capable of, but they thought they were capable of it. They wanted to be, calling all the shots and making all the big important decisions, and didn't really want to do any of like the finer detail type work. Or we even had a bunch of people, during 2020, during the summer of George Floyd, who, because we didn't post a black picture on Facebook for our homepage, they decided that Mel and I were racist, and so they aligned against us and made a list of demands that we basically, post a public apology for not having a black picture on Facebook. It's like, that what it takes to be a racist has changed a lot over the years, I guess. But the point being is that, again, this is a group of young kids who just had very different concept of what was important and what was necessary. Um, Never mind the fact that the vast majority of the felons that work at us are minorities in one way or another, and that we're working with them to improve their lives. Um, that's too easy and obvious. So, based on some of these different experiences with college degrees, it was like, wow, I'm not sure what's coming out of college anymore, but it's a red flag. I don't know what I'd be getting if you're coming with a college degree. And compare that with a number of employees we've had with no college degrees that are motivated, driven, non-biased, hardworking. One of the smartest people at our company, probably, yeah, the smartest person at our company doesn't have a college degree, right? So it's just, you know, I think I think that's common too. You know, so many people walk so many different paths in life, and a lot of them weren't set out on a path early on where they were propelled into college by their parents, or maybe they ended up at, Lower Mud River Valley Community College for a couple semesters, but then they had to work or whatever. So I think there's a lot of life circumstances that can prevent college degrees that have nothing to do with their quality as an employee or their thoughtfulness or ability to get shit done.
Mhm.
And it's just less baggage.
Okay, okay. So,
What do you think of that?
well, I mean, I could go on at great length about. I spent a lot of time stewing about how frustrated I've become with academia over the years. But um, but I want to spare everybody that. I wanted to. I don't want to get too personal, and of course, not to reveal too much personal life details or anything like that. But on the on this topic of an academic approach to life or a path through life versus a more sort of practical approach to life and the sort of advantages and disadvantages of interfacing with the school system and stuff. You guys have a couple of kids. You have a couple of boys, and feel free to share just as much or as little as you want about this. But you've adopted a non-traditional or an unconventional approach to education with your boys, and maybe if you're willing or to give a little bit about your approach as a parent, your approach to your kids' education, and how's your own experience like with schooling and stuff informed that, or your own experience with running Break It Down? How has that informed you as a parent and your philosophy of bringing up your boys and especially when it comes to their schooling and their education?
Well, it's certainly no like panacea. It's nothing perfect as far as the system we've adopted or are pursuing. It's also nothing is set in stone with it either. It's fairly fluid. But I guess that if there's a label for what we're doing, it would be called unschooling, where effectively you let the kids or you work with them to identify what they're interested in. So, going back to my comment that I think the greatest failing of the school system is not helping kids identify what they truly enjoy, and instead kind of prompting kids to just, you know, fall in line and do the sequential work. This is basically saying, hey, as you identify what you enjoy, let's support you to do more of that. And
Okay.
as you do more of that, you'll run into barriers and challenges and roadblocks, and then you'll need to learn something new to do the next thing. Uh, and so it's pretty open-ended as far as that works. My one son decided he wanted to play hockey a year ago, and so we decided we would support that. He was actually quite out of shape coming out of COVID, and he started skating. He could barely skate around the rink. And fast forward to a year later, after about 360 days, literally, of consecutive ice skating, he was like the lead scorer in a tournament in El Paso the other week.
Wow.
Uh, and he's just extremely motivated and focused on improving his hockey. Uh, and and other things fall out of that. So like now he follows the NHL, and so he's really interested in statistics, and so he's memorizing all the different statistics or of all the different players, and so we can talk about percentages and stuff like that. And it's nothing formal as far as the math he's learning, and he certainly would test below his peers in math. But that's not really important. If and when he needs to learn math or wants to learn math, he can catch up on that quite quickly, I think. Um, and an example of that is, similarly, he was well behind his peers in reading, couldn't read as an 8-year-old. And then somewhere in there, he realized that he wanted to be able to read so he could do certain things. and he went from pre-emergent to reading at his peers level in 6 months.
Hmm.
And so maybe not every kid can do that, but that is a common result that's seen in the quote, unschooling community, is
Okay.
that once kids are motivated to learn something, there's nothing stopping them. It's just that we're not giving them the opportunity to identify what they want to learn always.
Okay. Um, and I mean, have you received any like pushback from anywhere on doing your kids' education this way? Are you part of like a network or something? Is there a group that does this, or like what are like?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of people in Austin that do different types of homeschooling or unschooling. And one of the benefits of Texas is that there are zero regulations around any of it.
Uh,
Uh, you know, contrastedly, other states like Pennsylvania, where I grew up, has extremely aggressive requirements. If you want to homeschool, your kid needs to be able to pass this test, that test, the next test, the following test, et cetera. There's a battery of tests lined up for their entire childhood that they have to pass. And if they don't pass those, then you are pretty much court ordered to bring them back to school or whatever it looks like. So Texas has none of that. So that certainly allows quite a degree of flexibility with shaping education differently.
okay. And what about the kids' socialization? Like, do you feel like they miss out on some socialization by not going to school with other kids all day, or do they have other ways to get that socialization?
Yeah, there's a lot of other ways that they get that socialization. Obviously, it's not the same as being in a school with your peers, every day, all day long, and that kind of stuff. But between the community of other kids doing similar stuff and socializing, or Osro socializes with all sorts of people in the hockey community right now. And not just kids, grown-ups, adults, college students, it's, all ages. And
Hmm.
so I think in some ways, when you compare him with other kids his age, he's maybe more comfortable talking and communicating with adults than younger kids. A lot of younger kids tend to maybe avoid adults, whereas just because of who he's been around, it comes maybe a little bit easier to him, even I would say.
Okay. Well, man, it's been super interesting to hear about this, to hear about Break It Down. I think we can start to wrap, but just before we close, so if people want to find out more information about Break It Down, you have a website. Is that the best way, or social media or something to find Break It Down?
Breakitdownaustin.com is the website. It's currently undergoing a rework, so I think it's going to look differently in a month than it does today. Our socials have really been pretty quiet for the last several years, but we are also intending to bring those back online later this year. So yeah, there's not maybe a whole lot to look at, but there is some stuff there, and I think we're going to see it really grow and flourish over the next few years as we continue to evolve and build on what we've got.
So if people hear this and they're interested, maybe to talk to you more, or maybe inquire about jobs or positions or something, just contact you through the website.
Yeah, yeah, there should be a way to do that, or it's Jeff at Jeff at breakitdownaustin.com. I'm always open to receiving a direct email.
Okay, and you mentioned too, so you guys are selling your highly nutritious dog food made from the food waste, and you're selling
Mhm.
that around Austin, but you also have some treats and some other products that can be ordered online, and that's the conscious pet dot what
Life.
dot life. Conscious
Yeah.
pet dot life.
Yes, sir.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much, dude, for talking today. This has been super cool. I know a lot of this stuff, but it's still been super informative and interesting for me to kind of go back over it and like ask some questions where I had like blank spots in my thinking and stuff. So anyway, thanks for taking the time, and yeah, we'll see what the audience thinks of this one.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, man. Good talking to you as well, Josh. Thanks for being the interviewer today.
Right on, man. Well, we will catch up again soon.
Sounds good.